branded a witch and tied to the stake by her own village. A cowboy rode through the flames and gave her sanctuary. The rope was already knotted when I rode into Garnet Creek. Not a hang rope, that would have been one kind of ugly. This was a lashing rope, thick as my thumb, looped around a woman's wrists and cinched to a post they'd driven into the ground at the edge of town, and they'd built a bonfire not 6 feet from where she stood. Dry brush and fence rails and what looked like pieces of a chair someone had dragged out of a house. The fire hadn't reached her yet, just the heat, just the light of it on her face. I pulled Cutter to a stop on the ridge above town and looked down at that. I'd seen mobs before. Seen what they do when they stop being a collection of people and start being one thing, one mouth, one intention. I'd seen it at a dry goods dispute turn into a shooting in Abilene. I'd seen it on the road up from the canyon outside of Prescott, where 3 men I'd known slightly were already dead by the time the sheriff got there. The faces of the people doing the killing didn't look like the faces of the people I'd shared a fire with the week before. The faces of mobs are not the faces of people. They are the face of the mob. It is a single face, and it is not a kind one. I sat Cutter on that ridge maybe 2 minutes, long enough to count. 30 people, maybe 35. The fire was new, but they'd been at this longer than the fire. I could see by the way they were standing, the looseness that comes after adrenaline starts to bleed off. They'd been shouting for a while. Most of the shouting was done. The woman at the post wasn't screaming. That was the thing I noticed last, and it was the thing that moved me. She had her chin level. The firelight was on her left side, and she was turned slightly away from it, not cowering, just the natural thing a body does when heat comes at it from one direction. Her hair was loose, brown, and tangled. Her dress was torn at the collar. She was watching the crowd the same way I once watched a man who I knew was going to pull a gun. Patient, clear-eyed, waiting to know exactly what was coming so she could decide what to do with it. I touched Cutter's flank with my heel. My name is Walt Cordell. I was 43 years old that summer, and I had been moving through the territory for about 6 years without anything I'd call a destination. I'd had a ranch once, northeast of Cimarron, and a wife named Frances, and a boy named Thomas who died at 8 months, and a girl named Clara who made it to 4 years, and then died of the same fever that took Frances the following winter. After that, I sold the land to my neighbor for half what it was worth because I couldn't look at it anymore, and I moved. I wasn't running from grief. I want to say that plainly. Grief doesn't chase you. Grief is a stone you carry in your chest, and it doesn't get lighter when you move, but the moving gives you something to do with your hands. I worked. I trailed cattle from the panhandle up to the rail yards. I did fence work and well digging, and one winter I drove a freight wagon through country so cold the grease in the wheel hubs turned to chalk. I did those things because they were honest work, and they kept my hands occupied, and they did not require me to be in one place long enough for a place to matter. I was not the kind of man people called soft. I was not the kind of man people called cruel either. I was the kind of man people called useful when they needed something done, and invisible when they didn't, and I had made my peace with that. I was passing through Garnet Creek on my way north to a job in the Dakotas, a foreman position on a ranch that had written to me through a contact in Denver. I was not supposed to be in Garnet Creek for more than one night. The crowd moved back when I rode in. Not because they were afraid of me. A single man on a horse is not a threat to 30 people with torches and purpose. They moved back because I came in fast, and Cutter is a big animal, and I did not slow down. I rode straight through the gap in them and pulled up between the fire and the post, and Cutter turned broadside, which he does when he's nervous, and which had the accidental effect of making us a wall. A man stepped forward, red-faced, barrel-chested, the kind of man who runs things in a town like this not by title but by size and volume. He had a torch in one hand and the look of someone whose momentum had just been interrupted and who found that intolerable. "You ride on," he said. "This is town business." I looked at the woman at the post. Up close she was younger than I'd thought, maybe 30, maybe a little more. She had dark eyes and a cut on her forehead that had dried. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, not relief, not hope exactly. More like a kind of careful attention, like she was trying to assess whether I was another kind of trouble or a different kind. "What'd she do?" I said. I said it flat, not a question exactly. "Witchcraft," the barrel-chested man said. "Killed Harlan Priest's cattle with a curse. My boy been sick 3 weeks and she come around him and now he's worse. Millie Orton lost her baby and this woman was in the house 2 days before." I looked at the woman. You a witch, I said. Something moved in her face, not fear, closer to contempt, but she had the discipline to keep it in. I am a healer, she said, her voice was steady. I use plants and what I know. Harlan Priest's cattle had blackleg. It was already in them when I told him to cull the sick ones. He didn't. Your boy has had the same cough for 3 winters, and what I gave him wasn't making it worse. It was taking longer than you wanted. And Millie Orton's baby was turned wrong in the womb, and I could not turn it back. I told her husband that was a risk before I tried. Shut your mouth, the barrel-chested man said. What's your name? I said to her. She looked at me steadily. Nora Vass. I got down off Cutter. The crowd murmured. I heard the word stranger twice and the word fool once. I walked to the post and I took out my knife and I cut the rope at her wrists. It took 2 cuts because the rope was thick and I don't carry a sheath knife, just a working knife with a blade about 4 inches long. The barrel-chested man came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder, and I turned around. I'm not a large man by some measures. I'm lean rather than broad. But I have spent 20 years doing work that requires physical steadiness, and there is a way of standing and a way of looking at a man that communicates a specific thing, which is, this is as far as you go. I had that way. I'd had it since I was young. Some men have it naturally. I think I got it the hard way, which is the way it sticks. He took his hand off my shoulder. You touch her again, I said. Or you take 1 step toward her, I will put you on the ground and I will tie you to this post and let you stand next to this fire for about 10 minutes, and then we can discuss it further. Nobody talked, the fire crackled. Cutter shifted his weight and exhaled through his nose. She's got nowhere to go, somebody said from the crowd. A woman's voice, not hostile, just stating something she thought was a fact. She's got somewhere to go, I said. She's coming with me. I didn't know what I was saying when I said it. Or rather, I knew what I was saying, but I hadn't reasoned it through. Some decisions you make the way you make a fast shot. You don't think it, you just align. I knew she couldn't stay in that town. I knew a mob that gets interrupted will finish what it started once the interruption rides away. I knew I had a camp 3 miles north on a creek bend with a canvas shelter and food and a fire that was mine to build how I wanted. The rest I figured out later. She didn't argue about coming. She walked beside Cutter, not behind. I kept my pace to hers, which was quick. She was not a small woman, long-legged, and she moved like someone who was accustomed to covering ground on foot. We were out of sight of the town before she spoke. I don't know your name, she said. Walt Cordell. You from around here? No. She was quiet a moment. Then, you could have ridden on. I didn't answer that. It wasn't a question and it didn't need one. At camp I got the fire up and she sat across from it, and I could see her hands then, in the firelight, and the rope marks on her wrists were deep and red. I had some of the yellow salve that a camp cook named Jesse had made me carry since I'd gotten a friction burn roping that spring. I passed it across the fire, and Nora Vass looked at it a moment. That's calendula and lanolin, she said. I don't know what it is. A woman in Wyoming gave it to me. She used it on her wrists without further comment, which I respected. I made coffee and I made a meal out of what I had, which was hardtack and salt pork and some dried onion, and she ate without complaint and drank 2 cups of coffee, and I thought, whoever raised this woman knew what they were doing. She told me about herself across 3 nights at that camp, not all at once, not in any organized way. She'd been raised in Kentucky by a grandmother who was a midwife, and the grandmother had taught her what she knew the way tradespeople pass things on. By doing, by watching, by correction. When Nora was 22, she'd married a man named Vass who was a decent man, she said, but restless. And he'd brought her west and then kept moving west until one day he was gone and didn't come back. And whether he'd been killed or whether he'd simply left, she never fully knew. She'd stayed because by then she knew the territory and the territory knew her, and she had people who needed her work. Blackleg is a soil disease, she told me on the 2nd night, unprompted, while she was tending something she'd found in the creek bank that I couldn't identify. It's in the ground. You can't curse a herd with blackleg. You'd have to go back in time and put the spores there 20 years ago. I know that, I said. She looked up at me. Most people here don't. Most people here weren't thinking about cattle disease, I said. They were thinking about all the things that went wrong this year and needing somewhere to put it. She was quiet a moment. I know, she said. That's what made it dangerous. They didn't pick me because they thought it was true. They picked me because they needed it to be true. That was the clearest thing I'd ever heard said about how mobs work, and I had been thinking about mobs my whole adult life. On the fourth day, I made a decision. I had a letter in my coat pocket from a man named Albright in the Dakotas offering me the foreman position. 60 a month plus housing, which was good money for the time. I'd been heading toward that letter for 6 weeks. I sat with that letter a long time that morning, before Nora was awake. I was not fooling myself about what I was doing or why. I am not a man given to fooling himself. It is a luxury that life had not permitted me for some years. I was 43 years old and I had been alone for 6 years, and I had met a woman who was smart and steady and honest, and who had stood at a post in the firelight with her chin level and her eyes clear. And I did not want to ride north and leave her in a camp on a creek with winter coming and a town 3 miles away that wanted to finish what it had started. Whether that was love or something more like recognition, I couldn't have told you. Maybe there's no difference between the two when you're old enough to know what you're looking at. I put the letter in my fire. When Nora woke up, I was already working. I'd ridden back toward town at first light and bought what I needed from the store there. The storekeeper sold to me without a word, which told me he was not a mob man, just a town man, and I'd come back with boards and nails and a roll of canvas and tar paper, and I was putting up a better shelter. She came out and stood in the cold morning air and looked at what I was doing. "That's not a one-night structure," she said. "No," I said. She stood there. I could feel her looking at me, the specific quality of that attention which was not passive. She was deciding something. "You had somewhere to be," she said. "Had." She walked over and picked up a board and held the end of it where I needed it held, and we built the rest of the wall together without further discussion. I want to tell you what it was like that fall, because people don't usually tell you about the practical parts, and the practical parts were what I knew best, and what I was best at, and the practical parts were what I was made for. I knew land. I'd been reading land since I was 12 years old, where water would be, where it wouldn't, where a structure could stand without the ground taking it, where the wind came from and how to set your back to it. The creek bend was good land. There was timber within half a mile and a south-facing slope, and the soil in the bottom ground was dark and deep. I'd walked it all on the second day while Nora was sleeping, because that's the first thing I do when I stop somewhere. I dug a root cellar before the first frost. I cut and hauled timber for proper walls. I built a chimney from creek stone. These are not fast tasks. They are weeks of work, the kind that leaves you sore in your hands and your back and your shoulders, the kind you fall asleep during before you mean to. I am telling you I wanted to do them. There is a particular satisfaction in building something with your own hands in a place you intend to stay, and I had not felt that satisfaction in 6 years, and it was like water after a long, dry spell. Nora worked. She did not require managing or explaining or supervision. She knew what needed doing, and she did it, built the larder and stocked it, organized the herbs she'd saved from the camp she'd had in town before they ran her out of it, started a garden in a south-facing patch against the wall of the shelter. She knew how to make things last. She knew how to make do with less than you thought you needed. These are the rarest qualities in a person, man or woman, and I respected them without comment because that was the kind of woman she was. She didn't want to be complimented. She wanted to be worked alongside. What we did not do that fall was talk about what we were to each other or where it was going. Some things you just build around, the way you build a structure around a chimney rather than trying to put the chimney in after. There was a man who came in October. He was from the town, not the barrel-chested one, a younger man, maybe 25, thin and dark-haired, with the look of someone on an errand he hadn't chosen. He stopped at the edge of our clearing on a gray afternoon and called out my name. I came out to him. I left Nora inside. "She's not welcome back," he said. "You understand, she can stay out here, but she's not to come back in." "All right," I said. He blinked, a little surprised I wasn't arguing. "We just wanted you to know the—" "I heard you," I said. "We won't trouble you, you won't trouble us, that's how this works." He looked at the structure behind me, which by October had proper board walls and a real door, and the stone chimney I'd built, smoke coming from it steady. He looked at the woodpiles stacked along the south wall, and the root cellar door set into the ground. I watched him understand something, not all of it, but some of it. that this was not a temporary camp, that this was a man who was staying, that this was a man who knew what he was doing and who was not interested in the town's opinion of it. He rode away, and I didn't see him again for several months. The storekeeper's name was Eben Cross, and he was the first person from Garnet Creek who came out to us willingly. He came in November, not long before the first real snow, and he said he had a woman in the town who'd been in labor for 2 days and was in trouble, and the nearest doctor was 40 miles, and he had heard, in a sideways, careful way, that Nora Vass knew what to do with these things. I looked at Nora. She was standing in the doorway of the cabin. I'd started calling it a cabin by then, which is what it was, with an expression that told me she'd already decided. "I'll need my bag," she said to me. We went together. I carried her bag. She did not ask me to come, and I did not ask if she wanted me. I just saddled both horses, and we rode into town in the cold, and the town was quiet at that hour, and we went to the house Eben pointed us to. Nora was in there 3 hours. I sat outside on a stump in the cold and smoked my pipe and waited. The barrel-chested man lived 2 houses down. I could see his window and occasionally his shadow. When she came out, the baby was alive, and so was the mother, and I watched Nora's face in the lamplight that spilled from the open door. And she was tired, deeply tired, the kind that doesn't show on the face but in the body, in the slope of a shoulder. And I stood up, and she walked over to me, and I handed her the reins of her horse, and she looked at me. Just looked at me, like she was checking on something, like she needed to confirm something she thought she knew but wanted to be sure of. "Thank you," she said, very quiet. "Didn't do a thing," I said. "That was your work." "You being here matters," she said. "You know that." I didn't argue with her. She knew things about people that I didn't always know, and when she said something plainly like that, without any softness around it, I had learned to take it as truth. By winter, the town came to her. Not the barrel-chested man, not most of the people who'd been at the fire, but others. Eben Cross, who had a cousin with a chest complaint, a woman named Hargrove with a child who wasn't growing right, a young rancher who'd cut his arm badly and it was going bad, and Nora spent 2 days with that arm and saved it. She charged them fair prices and kept no grudges and treated them all the same way, directly, without sentiment, telling them the truth about what was wrong and what could be done about it. They were afraid of her for a while still, most of them. Not because they thought she was a witch anymore, events had made that position difficult to maintain, but because she was good at something they didn't understand, and she was steady in a way they weren't used to, and she had survived what they'd done to her without apparent damage to her dignity, and some people find that unsettling. They would rather have you ruined by what they do to you. But people need healers, and she was good. And gradually the fear got softer and the practicality got harder, and by spring there were people in Garnet Creek who said they'd been wrong, not to her face and not to mine, but said it among themselves in the way people do when they can't quite admit it out loud. The barrel-chested man never came. I didn't expect him to. I want to tell you about one night in February. The worst cold of that winter came in over 3 days. The creek froze solid, and the snow was deep enough to make the horses work hard even in the short distance between the barn and the cabin. The sky was the kind of white-gray that means it isn't done, and the temperature at night was something I would rather not estimate because I don't like to think about it. On the second night of the worst of it, I woke up at about 2 in the morning because Cutter was making a noise in the barn, and I thought he might be in trouble. I put on my coat and my boots and went out. Cutter was fine. He'd just been restless, as horses get in cold weather, and he settled when I came in and put my hand on his neck. I stood there with him a while. The barn was warm the way barns are in deep cold, all that animal heat pooled under the roof. And it smelled of hay and horse and the particular sweetness of large animals in winter, which I have always found a comfort. When I came back in, Nora was awake. She was sitting up in bed in the dark with the quilt pulled around her, and she asked me quietly if Cutter was all right. "He's fine," I said, "just cold." I got my boots off and hung up my coat. It was dark in the cabin except for the low orange light of the banked fire. "Walt," she said. "Yeah. Sit down a minute." I sat on the edge of the bed. She put her hand on the side of my face, not tentatively, not like she was asking permission, but with the same directness she put into everything. Just put her hand on my face and looked at me in the dark. "I want to say something," she said. "All right. I know what you did for me, not just at the post, all of this. She moved her hand slightly, indicating the cabin, the winter, the year. I know what you gave up to do it, and I know you wouldn't want me to make a speech about it, so I won't, but I want you to know I see it. I see you. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I could have said anything. And I'm here because I choose to be, she said. Not because I have nowhere else. I have somewhere. I have places I could go. I'm here because this is where I want to be, and you are who I want to be beside. I want that to be a thing you know. The fire settled and gave a small pop. Outside, the wind was working at the roof. I put my hand over hers where it lay on my face, just held it there. I'd had a wife I loved, and I'd lost her, and I had not expected to have this again, this specific thing, to be known and wanted, not for what I could provide or perform, but for what I was. A woman who saw me clearly and chose me with that clarity. I had not expected that twice. I know, I said, same. She didn't need more than that, and I knew she didn't, because she was that kind of woman. We stayed like that in the dark a while, her hand on my face and my hand over hers, the fire low and the winter howling at the walls, and the walls held, and we were warm. Spring came the way it does in that country, not gently, not gradually, but suddenly like a decision. One morning the snow was there, and 2 days later the creek was loud with melt, and the south slope was showing bare ground, and the horses were impatient in the morning. I put in a proper garden that spring, larger than what Nora had started the fall before, a kitchen garden against the south wall and a larger field plot for corn and beans, which meant I needed to break new ground, and I spent a week with the horse and the plow doing it, and it was good work. Hard in a way I liked. My hands knew it. Nora walked the rows with me one evening when the light was going amber and long, and she told me what she wanted to plant and where, and she knew things about companion planting and soil I didn't know, and I knew things about irrigation and drainage she didn't know, and we worked it out between us the way you work most things out when two people are paying attention. I was not the man I'd been in Cimarron 20 years before. I was older and my back hurt in cold weather and my eyes needed more light than they used to. But I was not the man I'd been on the trail either in those 6 years after Francis died, that hollow moving man. I was something else. Something that had been pared down to what was essential and then, unexpectedly, given something back. Nora was good. I don't mean good in the soft sense, I mean it in the hard sense, the real sense. She was competent and honest and loyal, and she brought her full self to whatever she put her hand to. She was good the way a well-built thing is good, the way a piece of land is good. Not easy, not decorative, sound all the way through. And she'd chosen me. She'd said so plainly in the dark in February without decoration. She'd said it the way she said everything, directly, so I'd know it was true. That is not a small thing to be given, especially when you've lived long enough to know how rare it is. There is a moment I go back to sometimes, not the February night, but a later one the following summer. It was evening in July. The air was warm, and the fireflies were up in the meadow grass down by the creek. I was sitting on the step outside the cabin door with a cup of coffee going cool in my hand, watching the light change on the ridge above the creek, and Nora came out and sat beside me. She didn't say anything, neither did I. The fireflies did their patient work in the grass. A nighthawk went over in its long, wheeling circle. The ridge went from yellow to orange to the kind of purple-gray that comes just before full dark. She put her hand on my arm, not pressing, just resting there. I thought about the man I'd been on that ridge above Garnet Creek, looking down at a fire and a woman with her chin level, and a crowd with its single ugly face. I thought about that 2-minute pause before I touched Cutter's flank. I've wondered sometimes what would have happened if I'd ridden on. Probably I would have made it to the Dakotas. Probably I would have been a good foreman. Probably I would have worked another winter and another spring and moved on again, that stone in my chest going nowhere. I did not ride on. I sat on that step in the July dark with a good woman's hand on my arm and the fireflies working the meadow grass. And I was a man in his own place with work he knew how to do and someone beside him who had chosen him with her eyes open. That was enough, more than enough. It was, I would say, about everything.